The fluorescent tube above me has been flickering for 3 weeks. It does it on a cycle, every 8 seconds or so, a brief stutter of blue-white light. I've timed it, old habit. In the OR, you timed everything. Blood pressure every 15 minutes, suction intervals, the residents' hands. I could tell by watching their hands whether they'd slept. It's 4:47 a.m. The common room at the Allegheny County Emergency Shelter, Penn Avenue, Pittsburgh. I'm the only person in here. 39 other men asleep on cots behind that door, and I am out here in this plastic chair with a cup of machine coffee, black, no sugar, watching the fluorescent stutter. The light in here is identical to an operating room. I've thought about that every morning for 5 months. The color temperature, the way it flattens shadows. There is no shadow in an OR. Shadows hide things. You work in absolute light because anything hidden could be lethal. My hands are on the table right now. Still, they look still. For a person standing across the room, they would look completely still. But I'm a neurosurgeon. I was a neurosurgeon, and I know what fine tremor looks like at the subclinical level, the level below what instruments can measure. I feel it. The way you feel the engine of a car running while you're parked. The vibration that's too low to hear but moves through everything. I count this as one of the smaller cruelties, that the skill that would have allowed me to see my own deterioration is still present, while the deterioration remains. I want to tell you what was in those hands before I tell you what's in them now. 4,217 surgeries. That's the number. Not 4,000. Not approximately. 4,217. I know because I kept a surgical log from fellowship onward. Johns Hopkins, 1990. A yellow spiral notebook I bought at a CVS on Charles Street in Baltimore. By the time I left UPMC in 2015, I'd filled 9 notebooks, craniotomies, aneurysm clips, glioblastoma resections, acoustic neuromas the size of walnuts, cases that other hospitals had refused, shipped to Pittsburgh, to the UPMC Presbyterian Department of Neurosurgery, to Dr. Raymond Kessler's table. I was chief of neurosurgery at Presbyterian at 41 years old, the youngest chief in the department's history. I kept that number too. That's what this is actually. This is the story of a man who kept very precise numbers and completely failed to see the only number that mattered. It started with my back. If I'm being honest, and that's all this is at 4:47 in the morning in a shelter common room, it started with 12 years of curvature, a neurosurgeon's posture. You stand over a table for 6, 7, 9 hours. You bend. Your lumbar spine slowly develops opinions about this. Mine developed very specific opinions starting in 2003. By early 2004, the MRI showed it clearly. Herniated disc at L4, L5 with mild central canal stenosis. The kind of thing that, in a patient chart, you'd see and immediately understand. This person is in significant pain. I was that person. I understood it. Dr. Arthur Fenwick was a pain specialist at UPMC. We'd worked together for 8 years by then. He prescribed oxycodone, 10 milligrams, 3 times daily. We both knew what that was. Schedule 2, significant dependency potential, appropriate for the level of pain I was describing. I was describing it accurately. The pain was real. Ray, he told me, this is a temporary bridge. We manage the acute phase, explore surgical options, get you back to the table. I was back at the table inside 3 weeks. the oxycodone worked. Of course it worked. That's not the story. The story is what happens in the 18 months after it works. Here is what I knew about methadone before Arthur Fenwick suggested converting my prescription in 2006. I knew the molecular structure. Methadone hydrochloride, a synthetic opioid, full agonist at mu-opioid receptors. I knew it was first synthesized in Germany in 1937. I knew its half-life was 24 to 60 hours, depending on the patient's metabolism. I knew it accumulated in adipose tissue and released slowly, avoiding the peaks and valleys that made short-acting opioids feel, and be, more addictive. I had prescribed methadone to patients for chronic pain. I had had the exact conversation Arthur had with me. More stable, fewer mood fluctuations, better long-term management. And I had meant it because it was medically accurate. By 2006, I was taking 80 milligrams of oxycodone per day. I had escalated my own dose over 18 months because the 30 wasn't adequate, and then the 40 wasn't adequate, and the reasoning at each escalation was impeccable and valid. What was not rational was the fact that I was performing neurosurgery while dependent on 80 milligrams of oxycodone per day. I hadn't said that sentence out loud before this morning. Arthur said, methadone would be more stable. The half-life means no withdrawal between doses. I think you'd find it easier to manage. I said yes. I was a neurosurgeon who understood the pharmacology and saw the clinical logic. Dolophine 10 milligrams 3 times daily, 30 milligrams per day. We called it a conversion. In a way it was. The thing about methadone, the specific thing, the thing that made it the perfect trap for someone like me, is that it keeps its promises. Short-acting opioids lie to you in real time. You take the pill, you feel the absence, you take another pill. You can track the relationship. There's almost an honesty to it. Methadone doesn't do that. Its half-life is so long, and it accumulates in your fat tissue so steadily that for months, sometimes years, you genuinely cannot feel the dependency. Maintenance becomes indistinguishable from your baseline. I used to perform cortical mapping. When you're operating near critical motor strips or Broca's area, you apply a mild electrical current to the brain surface and watch what happens. If function disrupts, you've found the boundary. You don't cross it. Methadone disabled my cortical mapping. The function I needed to monitor was intact enough that I didn't see the disruption. My performance didn't crash. It eroded. 2% less processing speed, 3% degraded parallel cognition, a microsecond of additional hesitation. Not enough for anyone else to see, but neurosurgeons work on tolerances that have no margin. There is no room for 2%. I was the instrument and the operator simultaneously, and there is a fundamental axiom in surgical ethics: you cannot operate on yourself. The skull you cannot open is your own. I'm going to tell you about what happened in March of 2013. But first I want to tell you about 2009, because 2009 is when I noticed the first thing and chose not to look at it. I stopped sleeping. I stopped sleeping in a specific terrible way. I would take my methadone. By 2009, the dose was 90 milligrams, and I would go to bed, and my body would not sleep. The drug was suppressing REM architecture so completely that I was spending 7 hours in bed having approximately 90 minutes of fragmented, non-restorative sleep. Eventually, I got a sleep study. Dr. Dennis Chu, sleep neurologist, looked at me across his desk and said, "Ray, this is severe. This is consistent with someone who is taking a high-dose opioid chronically." I said, "I'm on a medically managed pain protocol." He said, "I know. I'm just telling you what I see." I did not tell him the methadone dose. I didn't lie. I just didn't mention the 90 milligrams. I was getting to Presbyterian at 6:30 every morning after 90 minutes of sleep. I was operating. I was teaching residents. I was compensating so effectively that no one saw anything. The only thing that changed was that I began asking for second opinions on my own decisions. I'd ask the resident to confirm the imaging. I'd ask the scrub nurse to read back my suture count. They thought I was being pedagogical. I knew what I was doing. I was building external redundancy into a system whose internal redundancy was degrading. Barbara Holtz was 54 years old and taught music, violin and piano, at a middle school in Erie. Her neurologist called me directly. "Ray, I want my best for her." March 14, 2013, 7 hours and 12 minutes. The tumor came out. Clean margins. No intraoperative complications. I was satisfied with the resection as I began to close, and then I saw it. The margin on the deep aspect of the resection, I had gone 4 millimeters deeper than I had planned into the sensory cortex. I looked at where I was and I knew, with the precise clarity that only a neurosurgeon standing in an open skull can have, that I had crossed a line. Not by much, 4 millimeters. It wasn't negligence by clinical definition. The tumor was out. Barbara Holtz's life was not in danger. But her left thumb, essential for a violin teacher, was permanently impaired. At 6:22 the following morning, I was in the surgical locker room, washing my hands at the sink. I looked at them. They were trembling, not visibly to anyone else, but I pressed my palms flat against the edge of the sink, and I felt it, the fine, rapid oscillation of early withdrawal. It was 6:22 in the morning. I had taken 110 milligrams just 7 hours before. My body was in withdrawal. I stood at that sink for 4 minutes and 32 seconds. I counted. I went from the locker room to my office and called the Pennsylvania Physician Health Program at 8:15 a.m. My name is Raymond Kessler. I'm Chief of Neurosurgery at UPMC Presbyterian. I need to report a potential impairment. I hung up and sat in my chair for 20 minutes thinking, what have I done for the last 9 years? The PHP investigation took 8 months. During that period, I was under active monitoring, random urine screens, quarterly reports to the board. I was still operating because until the investigation concluded, I had not been found to be currently impaired. In January 2014, I entered a monitoring contract and a taper protocol for the methadone. I reduced my caseload voluntarily. I told the department I was managing some health issues and would transition cases to Dr. Kevin Park, 38 at the time, my best resident. In March 2015, I had a positive urine screen, not for anything illicit, but for benzodiazepines, a sleeping medication a different physician had prescribed that I had failed to report to the PHP. The Pennsylvania State Board of Medicine was notified. My license was not suspended, it was revoked. There is a difference that is very precise. Suspension implies a path back. Revocation is a closed door. I have been a physician without a license for 11 years. The financial collapse was surgical. License revoked. Hospital privileges gone. Malpractice insurance canceled. Zero income. Our household income had been nearly $1 million a year. By July 2015, my income was zero. Elaine had filed for divorce. She had watched me not be present for 23 years, and then watched me be very precisely present while managing a dependency she didn't know about. That's a specific kind of betrayal. We sold the house in Squirrel Hill in September 2015. David, my son, a cardiologist in San Francisco, called me once. He listened without interrupting, and then he said, "How long?" I said, 11 years. He said nothing for a moment, and then, "I have to go." That was the last real conversation. Rachel texted me on my birthday, September 14th, a single message. "Thinking of you, Dad." I respond, "Thank you, sweetheart, love you." That's what's left. I did not go from physician to homeless in one step. Shadyside apartment from 2015 to 2018. Lived off savings and small medical consulting work. I sold the Rolex Datejust in November 2019. It went to a jeweler on Walnut Street for $3,200. I paid 3 months of a reduced apartment in Lawrenceville with that. By 2020, post-acute withdrawal syndrome set in. Chronic high-dose methadone over a prolonged period produces measurable changes in prefrontal cortex function. The parallel processing that allowed me to manage 7 variables in an OR was diminished, probably permanently. I had spent 11 years dependent on a molecule that alters the structure of neurons involved in memory and cognitive function. The skull you cannot open is your own. The eviction from the Lawrenceville apartment was in the spring of 2023. I slept in a car, a 2011 Camry, for 6 weeks, parking 3 blocks from Presbyterian. I just needed to be near something that had been mine. When the car failed inspection, I sold it for $800 and walked to the shelter with a backpack containing Gray's Anatomy, 41st edition. I haven't opened it. I don't know what that means exactly. If I open it and I feel something, grief, recognition, I'm not sure I have the capacity to carry that right now. I'm on 8 milligrams of methadone now through the Allegheny Health Network. At 8 milligrams, it just prevents acute withdrawal. The anhedonia is complete. Reward circuitry is so thoroughly recalibrated that almost nothing generates a signal anymore. I read Chekhov because he simply describes people in rooms making the small decisions of their lives with incomplete information. This is the most accurate literature I have ever read. I wake every morning at 4:37 a.m., not by alarm, but by a body reset by hospital rotations. Kevin Park is the current chief of neurosurgery at Presbyterian. I trained him. He does not know I'm here, 3.1 kilometers from the hospital. I walked past the windows of the neurosurgical ward in October. I kept walking. I don't think Kevin Park would want to know. Knowing would create an obligation, and I made my choices. I've thought about what I'd say to Arthur Fenwick if I could go back to 2006. I'd say, "Arthur, I am the patient who proves that knowledge doesn't protect you. I understood the pharmacology of methadone at a level most pain specialists don't reach. I knew the receptor binding, the half-life, the clinical indicators. And I spent 11 years inside a dependency I could name in 3 languages but could not see in myself. You can't operate on yourself. The only brain I couldn't map was mine. Arthur was not a bad doctor. The system produced a molecule that keeps its promises, a culture that normalized its use, and a physician who believed understanding the mechanism meant controlling the outcome. Barbara Holtz's left thumb knows better now. The coffee from this machine is bad. It says descaling required and has for months. At 9 o'clock, I'll walk to the clinic for my dose. Morella will check my chart, and then I'll walk to the library. That's the day. I don't have a post-op summary for this. The case is still open. I have 8 milligrams, a coat from 2008, and a book I don't open. I have a precise count of the months since I last spoke to my son, 37. And on the nights when I cannot sleep, I lie in the dark and count the seconds between the fluorescent flicker. I know the interval, 8 seconds, give or take. You'd think I'd stop counting. You'd think I would have learned by now.